Hi there, Booktube. It's Sunday, the 8th of August, and I have shockingly failed to do any kind of July Delights and Discoveries wrap up of the reading I did last month, which I normally try and do kind of, around the end of the month. Not only am I late, but also, to make things worse, I read I think 15 things last month. I had a few days away, went on a little trip to Hay-on-Wye, Britain's most bookish town in Wales. And so, I'm potentially in a pickle now. On the other hand, July was Jane Austen July, and I did a few Jane Austen July videos. A couple of the other things that I've read have come up in Poetry Thursday videos. And I did a Booktube prize video about ranking 6 books that I read for the one of the fiction semi-final groups, and which included a couple of the things that I read this month in the 6 mini reviews that I did in that video. So it's not like I haven't already talked about lots of this stuff. So what I'm going to do is a relatively minimalist Delights and Discoveries July wrap up, really trying to focus on things I discovered, not necessarily books I discovered, but discovered about my reading this month, I think, and also my kind of mention my absolute highlights and the things that I really want to recommend to other readers out there. So Jane Austen July involved about 6 books, kind of closely tied in with that for me. And what did I find out? I found out that yes, Persuasion really is my favourite of Jane's major novels. It's one I always say, and rereading it was great to kind of confirm that. Would Sanditon have come in as one of my favourites if she had the chance to finish it? I don't know. I don't think so, from the bit the opening fragment of it. If you can hear a little noise off, it's the cat meowing, okay? Not my stomach or anything, any of the humans in the house. From the little fragment, it was good, and I was well disposed towards it because it's set in Sussex, the county where I live, and it's the only one of Jane's books that is, they visit Brighton in Pride and Prejudice and so on, but this is the one that would have been in Sussex Sanditon. But I'm not sure that it was going to be my favourite, so I'm not going to mourn the lack of it too much. In fact, I think the fact that she may have stopped it, and well, who knows? Knowing Jane, she would have really rewritten it many times over. So this wasn't her final product, as it were. What else did I find out? I found out that Jane Austen retellings are just not my thing. If the other Bennet sister couldn't do it for me, which is, a real favourite one. Cat, you're so noisy. Meow. Come here. Oh, no. If that one didn't work for me, then, I think they're a lost cause. And I did make a little video about that. And you were all very reassuring and saying, give up on them if they don't work for you. In contrast, I discovered that I can read a new non-fiction, new to me, non-fiction book about Jane Austen every July without getting bored and every time there's something new that I find out from them. So much so, I think, that I actually went and bought 3 more. I think I bought this July, as well as the one I actually read. So Clare Tomlin, I've got lined up for which is a fairly standard biography of Jane, and then Richard Jenkins, A Fine Brush on Ivory, which is a kind of appreciation and discussion of her writing style. And I can't show it to you because it's on the Kindle, also The Genius of Jane Austen, which is about her love of the theatre, and that's by Paula Byrne. And I got that because the one I read this year was The Real Jane Austen, A Life in Small Objects, by Paula Byrne. And one of the things that most interested me in that is her talking about Austen's love of the theatre and how what an effect that had on her novel writing. And I talk about that a bit in my discussing drama video that I made with Tilly this month, where we read a play that we know Jane read and enjoyed, which is The School for Scandal by Sheridan. So go and have a look at that if you like. I also found that I quite like Jane's favourite poet. That's Cooper, and there's a Poetry Thursday one about that, so I'll shut up about that. But that wasn't my poetry highlight of the month. My poetry highlight of July was reading Poor by Caleb Femi. Now again, I've done a Poetry Thursday video about this, but I had this, when I made that, the copy I had was from the library, and I was sort of raving about it to the extent that I actually went and bought a full price copy of the book to keep, because I appreciated this book of poetry so much. What I would say is that there are contemporary poets who really draw on the language of the street, as it were, you know, the slang of where they grow up. And Femi was born in Nigeria but grew up on the North Peckham estate in London. And, you know, people draw on that language to write really exciting contemporary poetry. And then there are poets who draw on a more, I don't know, classical poetic tradition in the English language, I suppose, and write interesting contemporary poetry drawing on that. What Femi does that was magic for me is he does both those things. He brings those things together in one collection, one set of poetry, in his very distinctive poetic voice as a young poet. And I can't recommend this highly enough. I'm about to say another of my top recommendations of the month, which is In by Will McPhail. And there I discovered that a graphic novel can be one of my top recommendations for the month. Gosh, that was a very round the houses way of saying that. I am not a graphic novel fan. Graphic novels rarely seem to work really well for me. I think that is partly my fault, because I'm really invested in words. You know, it's all about the words for me. So I have a tendency with graphic novels to sort of read the words and almost like not look properly at the images. And Tom of Tom LA Books told me that that's what I'm doing wrong. I think so. Reading In by Will McPhail, I made a conscious effort not to do that, and was rewarded in spades. And I think but I don't think it was just about me approaching the graphic novel more graphically. It's also that this is a graphic novel where the images are absolutely central to telling the story of the book and conveying the emotions of the book. It is funny, it's sad, it's thoughtful, it's 100% contemporary. You know, it's like it's you know, bang up to date, and I can't recommend it highly enough. There you go. So that's my second kind of top recommendation for the month, I guess. Now, something else I discovered this month is that even someone who is I think a really good writer, a really fine writer, can't necessarily outweigh, for me, it seems deeply embedded preference in fiction for the longer form. You know, short stories are not my thing. I just said graphic novels are not my thing, and you know, short stories also just not where I get my greatest rewards when reading fiction. Now, I read this month Stories We Tell Our Children by Marc Nash, who is a booktuber, and I pre-ordered this book and was really looking forward to it, and it is a really, really good book. Marc is quite literally a wizard with words, and this book is sparking with ideas as well as the language. But Marc had said, okay, I'm not grumbling here, Marc, but Marc had said that this is perhaps more of a novel than a book of short stories, that they're interconnected stories. And I think that meant I went into it with a kind of expectation, or I was looking for a closer connection between the stories than there actually is. And they are absolutely thematically linked in a really interesting way, in ideas, but also there's kind of emotional links between the stories. But I think because I was looking for a closer connection, then my expectations were thwarted, if that makes sense. If you want to see a really good summing up of this book, and have a look at what Sina of Beating Around the Book says about it, and I'll link to that below, because I'm not sure I did it justice, as it were. Interestingly, I actually found myself reading another collection of short stories this month, which, you know, generally I could go months on end without reading short stories at all. 2 this month. How did that happen? Well, the other one is Variations by Juliet, Jacques, and again, like Stories We Tell Our Children, it's bang up to date. I think it's 2020 or 2021 collection of short stories. The reason I read this was because last month I read Detransition Baby, which is, as you probably already know, an American trans author, Tori Peters book that is very much centered around the sort of trans experience of people, particularly in New York. I suppose, trans people in New York, men and women. And I found that extremely interesting and a very rewarding and worthwhile book. But I came away from it thinking, I'd like to read something that draws on that, like the sort of a British experience. And I noticed a review in The Guardian of Jake's book. And so she's a trans woman from the UK, and what she set out to do in her book of short stories is kind of to give us like 200 years of trans history in England through kind of like invented primary sources, if you know what I mean. So like letters, diaries, film script, excerpt from a supposed like oral history book. You know, so she invents those to kind of build this sense of this history. She's not a magic writer as Marc, but it really worked for me as a book in terms of the connections between the stories, and I suppose I went into it kind of knowing what I was going to get. So again, both of those are books I would recommend, and if you're a short story reader, you will enjoy them probably even more than me. Interestingly, my two, apart from Jane Austen, my two non-fiction choices this month also gave me kind of like an American and a British take on a similar issue, in that they're both essentially about racism. And one was Empireland, and that's by Sathnam and Sanghera, and it's a 2021 book. And the subtitle, secondary title for the book, is How Imperialism Has Shaped Modern Britain. So that gives you an idea of that describes the subject matter, except it's a slightly more personal book than that would imply. That sounds like it's going to be sort of purely sort of theory, politics, history, but actually there's a lot of Sanghera's own experience and family history and responses in it as well. It's a smart, thoughtful book. He's very English in his terribly fair, balanced, kind of quite polite delivery of what is some pretty kind of powerful material. The American book that I read, however, was a much stronger recommendation, although, the Sanghera is good, because I read The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, which I had never previously read, and Courtney Ferreter, our own Courtney Ferreter, told me quite clearly that I absolutely must read that. So while I was in Hay on Wye, I took the chance to grab a copy and read it straight away to, follow Courtney's orders, and how right she was. I know all of you out there will be saying, goodness me, Ros, didn't you know how wonderful James Baldwin's writing is? Well, I sort of knew, but, I'm English and I just somehow never got around to him. And he obviously has written fiction. This is non-fiction. It's passionate. It's a snapshot of its time and his experience, but it's totally relevant to the USA today, but also to Black experience beyond the US, and I suppose I appreciated its passion. I also appreciated it, the additional kind of, every time you read something like this as a white person, you get another layer of understanding, I suppose, that I'm grateful for. But the perhaps the number one reason for recommending it as a book to read is, boy, this man could write. Yeah, as I say, I know that's not news, but it was wonderful to find that really is true. His prose style is, superb. Well, now, I talked about the impact of expectations on how I felt about Stories We Tell Our Children. And I noticed that impact on other readers with a novel I read this month, which was Small Pleasures by Clare Chambers. Came out in 2020, I think. So it's a recent British novel. And after I finished reading it, I went and looked at some Goodreads reviews. As I was marking it up as having read. That's when I tend to look, because I often don't find them that helpful to read in advance. And I was surprised and amused almost by the number of reviews that grumbled about the ending of this book, because it ends with a train crash now, and they felt kind of outraged by that ending, as if it, the implication was that this sort of train crash ending had been kind of bolted on to the book in a really unbalanced way, except that the prologue for the book is all about the train crash. So for me, reading it all the way through the book, I was waiting for, how is the train crash going to come back? How is that going to be a kind of key part of this story? And so it worked like a tragedy in that respect. And yes, it's like there was a smoking gun, and at some point, that was going to get revealed, and it did. So why were people so put out? But I think it was because it's a book that is written in I think they were lulled by the style, which is a kind of like a nice sort of calm, well-written, unfussy, perhaps sort of Barbara Pym-like English female novelist style, and so they weren't expecting a melodramatic ending, I suppose, and so expectations matter, don't they? Is the answer, I guess. My final thought, and so I can get in just under 20 minutes, I hope, is that I discovered I can be a mood reader. I've said very firmly on this channel before, oh, I don't do mood reading. That's not, I don't. But I was ill the last few days of July, and I had a whole day when I couldn't read at all, day and a half when I was too ill to read, which is, that's how you define if Rose is really poorly, if she can't read. As I got just better enough to read, the thing I picked up, was definitely a mood choice, because I read 7 Little Australians by Ethel Turner, and this is a reread for me. This book was written in 1894 by an English woman who had moved to Australia, and it's a kind of, these days you'd probably call it a young adult book. It's about a family of children, the oldest of whom is 16, and then they go down in age to a baby, and it's funny, but it's also it's got a certain Victorian morality about it, I suppose. But they're feisty and interesting children, and the Australian setting is great. So that was my mood reading book to finish my month, which was a goodie overall, and I hope yours was too, but it's probably too late for you to want to talk about your July because we're well into August now. So enjoy August instead.